Now, it's not in my habit to agree with the Wall Street Journal, but Donald, they point out that even though you're a very smart guy, this is a very dumb thing to do.
Before these tariffs came in this morning, you must have been asking yourself, how could things get any worse? Before these tariffs, you were already suffering. But I'm here with a message of hope. We will overcome this attack on our economy.
I'm calling on an emergency session of Parliament like we had in the pandemic. What we're witnessing could be worse than the pandemic, and very likely will be worse. But Canadians are ready to fight back.
The political response there on Parliament Hill as Canadian leaders take up their posts on the front lines of a trade war with the United States. Are they prepared to meet the moment? Let's bring back the front bench. Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie. Lisa, I'll start with you. What was your initial takeaway from the comments that you heard today from all three political leaders?
Where was this notion that we needed an emergency session of Parliament a couple of months ago, Mr. Singh? I mean, come on. We've been saying this for a long time, that it's important to have Parliament open and functioning. And he was the one that held it back, quite frankly. So now he's decided he wants to have it in place. Well, okay. Well, let's bring back Parliament and see what happens. I think it is an important piece of it's not just pageantry. I think it's important to meet the moment where we have this situation where an economic war has been declared upon our country and no one's sitting in the House of Parliament right now to discuss it. I think that is a gaping hole for Canadians. Canadians need to know that their elected officials are discussing this matter with one another. So yes, there should be Parliament should come back as soon as possible.
Tom, I wanted to ask you about that because it's supposed to come back around the week beginning after March 23rd, which is when, you know, lots of people expect that the writ could drop, for example, and that's when an election campaign could get underway. But in the interim, in a few weeks, both the Premier and members, different stakeholders in the auto industry say the entire industry could collapse within a week of the imposition of these tariffs. If a bailout is on the table, do you think there is a prospect of Parliament reconvening to talk about what that support looks like or to even give it its endorsement?
No, I don't think that that's realistic. I agree with Lisa that it's a bit late. And Mr. Singh is also on record many times as saying that if he could just get his hands on the Liberals and force a confidence vote, he'd defeat the government and force us into an election anyway. I can't really follow his brand of thinking right now on this stuff. I think it's important for him to get into the news, but beyond that, it's very hard to follow. So with regard to whether or not Parliament and parliamentarians should be doing their job, the answer is yes. They won't be able to do that until the federal election is over. We'll find out one day, because Mr. Trudeau was quite vague on that. Its successor will be chosen Sunday, and we're not sure when Mr. Trudeau's planning on leaving, if that clip was worth. But I think that in all reality, it'll probably be a very short trip for the person who wins that leadership race, likely Mark Carney, we are told. If that's the case, he'll probably make a visit to Washington, maybe a visit to Paris and London, to show that he's got some ability to work with this stuff. Then we'll go straight to a writ drop. I don't see Parliament coming back. I don't see a throne speech in the works. By the way, even if Parliament came back, Mr. Carney wouldn't be in it, and I don't think that's something that the Liberals want to show either. So for all of I think that you're completely right. Somewhere third week of March of this month, we're going to be heading to an election.
Brian, we played like a sampling of what we heard from the Prime Minister, from Pierre Poilievre, and from Jagmeet Singh. We heard from, I think, every single Premier across the country today. As I mentioned earlier, they appeared to be very much on the same page. At the federal level, do you have a read on who met the moment? Did anyone not meet the moment? What's your take?
Now you get to ask an ex-premier. There you go.
Yeah. Which premier sucked, Brian? No, just kidding.
To Lisa's and
He'll never answer.
To Lisa's and Tom's points, I would tend to agree, but I think a lot of things can be true at the same time, in the sense that, look, if there was a need to have Parliament pass something to respond to the trade conflict, yes, absolutely, it should be called. If they were wanting to go to debate things, I think there's a very poignant argument there, and I agree that it would make a lot of sense for that to happen. I don't know if this was asked or if he was pressed or not. Speaking about not necessarily meeting the moment, I mean, Singh should have flat out said, let's call an emergency parliament sitting, and I will prop up the government for the time in which we will have that debate, because this is not about launching us into an election. This is about us being able to discuss those issues. That could have obviously alleviated an unfortunate situation that's happening at the same time as this trade conflict. And I've said before on this panel, ideally, what we know right now, ideally, Prime Minister Trudeau would have picked a date to resign that was much earlier than this. That would have been the ideal situation, but we're sort of left with what we have, and the circumstances have to be dealt with as they are. So with that, I think it makes sense for the next leader to then decide. I think they'll decide when the transition is, as much as Trudeau might want to, and they'll decide the transition. And I would think they will launch into an election right away, not only because maybe they judge that to be better for their circumstances, but also, look, we have a major thing going on. Let's get somebody a mandate. The campaign will serve as a great way to discuss how we respond to this. So I think it makes a lot of sense in a lot of directions.
Rob, the last word goes to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think I felt kind of bad for Mr. Poilievre and Mr. Singh today, because it's very difficult for opposition leaders on a day like today, when the people in government, whether it's Premier Doug Ford or Prime Minister Justin Trudeau, they're taking up all the oxygen because they're the deciders. They're actually making decisions. It's not about rhetoric for people who are in government. It's about actually implementing policy. And I agree with Brian and Tom and Lisa. I think we're all headed in. I think we all concur that we're headed into an election sooner rather than later. If Carney wins on Sunday, I presume he will want to trigger it while his polls are still high, because he's been watching the conservative polls go down like the Donald Trump stock market. So I think if I were him, I'd want to go sooner rather than later. Remember, Kim Campbell in 1993, she won in June and initially took the Tories to within striking distance of Jean Chrétien's Liberals. People forget that. She hung on into the summer, and then when that election came in October, they were literally decimated down to 2 seats. I think if Carney is foolish if he waits till the fall, because if he can somehow survive a confidence motion till the fall, because I think the same thing could happen to the Liberals as happened to the Tories in 1993. He could be different, though, if he goes quickly.
Yeah, there's one thing, all the premiers agree today, and so does the panel, that an election is likely coming. I'll leave it there. Yeah. Thanks, guys. Appreciate the discussion. Our front bench, Brian Gallant, Lisa Raitt, Tom Mulcair, and Rob Benzie.